To this week's Coffee Chat. I'm so happy you're here, and I'm going to fly solo today because the team is all taking care of their caregiving responsibilities, as we all do, and so they're not able to be here. Also, we're moving our location, and so we're having to work out the logistics of that. But we're glad you're here today. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit today about our monthly theme. Time for what matters most. And I wanted to share a story with you today. It was kind of interesting. Yesterday in Caregiver Support Group, Elizabeth talked about, what we're going to remember 5 years out. And that really got me thinking. And I want to tell you a story about Joe, who is a client of mine, who has become a family member, and what happened with Joe. So starting back about 6 years ago, an attorney referred me to this couple, and they were calling him constantly about their financial predicaments and very, very, very stressed. Joe was the one making the calls at the time. And one day he realized I was in the office and he said, "Summer, I'm just wondering, would you go see these people and see what you could do to help them?" And I said, "Certainly I would." And I got in my car and I drove out to Little Rock to meet Joe and Charles. The husband's name was Charles. And it was such a great meeting. They're great, great people. And I sat down, and 7 hours later, I walked out the door. I had a list of a 2-page list of things that they were concerned about, and including insurance, annuities, finances, properties. They owned properties in Florida and Texas, and they owned a home, but they were renting a townhouse at the time. Medicare issues, just a very long list. And what happened was I started going to see them a couple times a month, usually on Fridays, and I would be there for 3 to 4 hours trying to figure out, get all the paperwork, gather it all together, make calls, and all of that type of thing. So we went through about a year, and we had a really good time, and they're just really great people. And we brought an in-home care company in because Charles' health was starting to fail a little bit, and so we made a decision to do that. We interviewed some companies, and it was an experience. We brought a company in. They did a really, really great job. And so Charles was not so much at the table anymore discussing things with us, but he was in the background. And he was, always there. And so we were having a really good time. But, about a year or two into this, now listen, it took that long to start to really sort out all of the issues. They had about 30 years of issues. And so that they hadn't taken care of. They've been busy, and things were on back burners and like that. And it just happens. Paperwork stacks up, and we don't take care of it. And there it is. 30 years later, you've got some messes to take care of. But I remember one day I did show up at Joe's, and it was a little different than usual. She had taken and made the table all really nice and pretty. It didn't have stacks of paperwork all over it. And it had really nice bowls of fruit and chocolate and coffee cups. And so I went and I said, "Well, what's going on? What's happening today?" Because generally we just dive right into all the busyness and the paperwork and all of that. And she said, "I just thought we'd take a moment." And I said, "Well, that sounds nice." And so we sat down and we started talking. And the chocolate, she was like an expert. She's an expert, a connoisseur of dark chocolate. And so she had a couple samples, and we tried a couple samples of chocolate, had some strawberries and some, tangerines. And it was kind of nice. And so we started to talk. And we talked about her past. She's a poet, and where she had lived. And it came up that they were pilots. They had owned a rice farm, and they were pilots. And what was interesting is I had a dear friend in California. She had a pilot's license. They had a rice farm. of all things. And so we got, and her husband had a pilot's license, just like Joe and Charles did. And so we started talking, and I thought, oh my gosh, where have you been? And, it got really kind of exciting. And she had also worked as a school teacher in Monroe, Louisiana, where I had an aunt that had taught. So this was all very interesting, and we had such a nice time. We spent about an hour just sitting there eating chocolate and fruit and talking. Well, we got to work, and we did our daily work that we were going to work on that day. And 2 weeks later, I show up and we do the same thing. She's got it all set out and different types of chocolates and fruit, and it was just wonderful. So we started that habit every time we met. Of course, we didn't spend an hour, but we'd spend 30 minutes figuring out how things were with each other and what was going on in our lives. And it wasn't intentional on my part. I don't know. I haven't asked her if it was intentional on her part. But what we were doing was taking time for the things that matter, what matters most. And so this was what we did, a pattern we developed. And then we started to take short periods to go out to lunch. Now, Joe was becoming a very, very good friend at that point. And today, 6 years later, she has become an absolute delight in my life. I still help her with all types of things. And she's become family to me. And so as I was talking about yesterday in caregiver group, Elizabeth was talking about what's going to be important to you 5 years out. Wow. I can say I'm not 5 years out because I'm still in this relationship with Joe. But those moments where we sat at that table and we just laughed and we talked about our past experiences, where we've been, what our life had taught us, and all types of things. It just was amazing. Such a bonding experience, and something I'm looking back on today. We don't do it as much because she's now living in assisted living. But yet next week we will go to lunch, and we still do that. But what I ended up with was a client who became a family member to me, and I cherish her and cherish the times we spend together. Now, would I have ever thought that would be what would happen? Absolutely not. And such a delightful surprise. So, when I'm thinking about it in context of what Elizabeth was talking about yesterday, is that all I was there to do was the work. The work was all the paperwork, all the calls, all the things that had to be done every time I met with her, some of them quite urgent. But you can liken that to, cooking extravagant meals or washing laundry or all the normal chores that you do that, you're not going to remember all of that. What you are going to remember is pulling out a nice plate, a really decorative plate, putting some fruit on it, putting some veggies on it and some ranch dressing or whatever, and sitting down across the table from your loved one and getting to know them a little bit, finding out where they've been, what their life has been like, asking them to tell you a special story that they remember. There's nothing that you are going to remember more than that. And so I think we have to be really, with our loved ones especially, this was not a loved one, this was a client, and so I didn't have a plan. But with our loved ones, we can make some plans at least once a week. Just sit down at the dining room table and get some nice dishes out and just put some, hors d'oeuvres or something really simple on the plates, get some coffee or some drinks, and sit down and see about each other, learn about each other, because even though we know each other, we don't. And those are times that in 5 years, you're going to look back and remember. Not that you were washing all day or that you were, doing chores or vacuuming the rug or making this extravagant dinner for them. It's that you were sitting across from them, eye to eye, and learning about them and talking to them and sharing their bad times and their good times. That's what you're going to remember. So that's what I have to say for this week. And I'm hoping next week I'll have the team here and we can talk more about, time to remember what matters most to all of us. And this is really, really, really important stuff, because when our loved ones pass away, this is what we have left. And I'm asking you to really think about what matters most to you today. And I'm hoping that you'll have a great day and a great weekend, and let's thrive together. Thank you.